Thoulas, the SNP spokesperson, with 2 minutes. Alison Thoulas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Chancellor for advance sight of his statement, and the SNP welcome the money that he's committed. We acknowledge, however, the gaps and the limitations and constructively ask for particular actions in a number of areas. Firstly, the assistance for those waiting for the confirmation of a universal claim, the ending of the 5-week wait and the 2-child limit, additional support for carers who may be forced to stop work, a support for those caught in the New Starter furlough gap, support, as the Scottish Government have already put in place, for those who are newly self-employed, support for limited company directors who particularly feel as though they have been left out, removing the no recourse to public funds conditions which leave people without support in many cases, and helping asylum seekers whose support networks may have fallen apart, ensuring that pregnant women wrongly sent home on statutory sick pay and unpaid leave in March get access to the furlough scheme. The Chancellor talks of supporting viable businesses to stay afloat, but that viability is very much in the hands of the banks, who are making decisions on tight criteria. So I ask, what is he doing to ensure fairness in that assessment? The bounce back loan scheme he announces is good, and deferring can be useful, but many small businesses feel that this just stores up debt for the future. It's understandable that they may not want to take on more debt. So I ask him, will he look at more grants, at CBILS overdrafts and revolving credit to help those businesses through the current difficulties? Will he also look at assistance for food wholesalers who are keeping care homes and small shops in supply at the moment and are suffering due to the downturn in hospitality? He makes no mention in his statement of the many businesses who shut their doors on public health advice and now find that their insurers are refusing to pay out in business interruption claims. Will the government step in to cover disputed claims because businesses just do not have the time or the money to go through the financial ombudsman services or through the courts? Thank you.
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her constructive engagement with both me and others as we go through this difficult time. To turn to her specific questions, firstly, with regard to, again, I think helping the most vulnerable, there have been several different measures that we have put into place that will help many of the people that she mentioned, not least strengthening universal credit, as we have done by £1,000 over this year, and associated change in tax cuts, and providing discretionary fund to local authorities to help those in their communities who they know better than any of us sitting here who are in most need of support. And that will cover perhaps many of the groups that she talked about. With regard to the banks and viability tests, what I can tell her is that this new scheme, the Bounce Back Loan Scheme, will not ask for any forward-looking information from companies. It will be a very simple form for companies to fill in. It will be self-certification, and the banks will be doing customary fraud and money laundering and identity checks rather than any credit checks, given our 100% guarantee. So that problem should be solved. I've also spent time talking to the banks, as has the Economic Secretary, tirelessly on a daily basis about the other forms of credit that they are extending to small businesses. And she is right to point out that some businesses would prefer to have things like overdrafts. And in that vein, I'm pleased to tell her that the last numbers I had were that about 20,000 new overdrafts have been extended, together with about 60,000 capital repayment holidays. And of course, there is general SME lending that happens outside of CBILS or indeed our new Bounce Back scheme. But I can assure her that the Economic Secretary and I remain alight to this and will keep up all necessary pressure on banks to make sure that credit flows to where it needs to get to. But today I'm happy to put on record my thanks to them and their teams for helping us work at pace to get the Bounce Back Loan Scheme up and running for next Monday morning. And lastly, she asked about insurance companies, and I think she's right to highlight this. I would point both insurance companies and their policyholders to the very strong guidance set out in a letter by the FCA, which urged insurance companies to behave responsibly and flexibly with regard to the interpretation of their policies. We've made it very clear previously that where a policy, there was a question about whether it should pay it out depending on whether we had closed the business or not as a result of government action, that was cleared up. Of course, very few people have policies that would cover them for this, but where it is clear that they should have a reasonable expectation of coverage, it's right that the insurance companies pay that out, and we will keep a close eye on that situation.